just got back this last weekend. We were at Stockton for the Makeup OMTT. It was really good to get back on the water and tournament fish during this coronavirus pandemic era. It was really nice to be out on the water. Interestingly, one of the things we did, because we started off like gangbusters, caught our first 3 keepers in the first hour and a half, dragging a football jig, fishing off ledges like you would think you would do in the summer. And then we just didn't figure it out. Something switched, it changed. Anyway, our backup pattern was a favorite of mine and one technique that I had won a lot of money on, albeit not for a while. But back in 2008, I won a Central Pro-Am tournament flipping a tube. Table Rock was flooded, and it was a May tournament. Fish were spawn, immediate post-spawn, garden fry, that sort of thing. I was able to flip a tube on in people's yards. Actually, the water was so high, fishing behind their docks, up in their yards, flipping a tube to win that tournament. And then my dad and I, back in the old Heartland days, in 2011, we won a tournament on Stockton in flooded bushes, flipping a tube as well. And then lots of success in Kansas, and even a solo pro tournament, second place in a championship on Palm de Terre, flipping a tube and a baby brush hog, predominantly a tube, up in a river on shallow wood. I have a ton of confidence in a tube. A lot of guys, they like that little brown jig, or they've got just their pet lure. For me, when the going gets tough, I flip a tube. And so we're going to talk about flipping a tube in just a moment, and how I rig it, what line I use, rod, reel, the whole 9 yards, including a little tip I learned years ago in Texas to help when I was on a guided trip, to help our hookup ratios and things like that. So if you struggle with this, a lot of guys do, a lot of guys get a lot of bites on this, but they get frustrated because they lose a lot of fish on this as well. Stay tuned. We're going to move over to our little workshop area, and we're going to talk about rigging a tube and how to flip it. Okay guys, so here we are kind of in our little miniature workshop. This is where we have experimented with pouring our own plastics, using our different molds to melt our own lead to make our jigs, shaky heads, various different things like that. We still use some other brands and things, but we are into that, making our own swim jigs right now, trying some prototypes. Anyway, today we're talking about flipping a tube, and based on some of the success, you will see some spliced in live video from last Saturday, because the tube bailed us out, helped us finish out our limit. We did catch a lot of little fish. We did not catch a lot of big fish. But let's talk about the tube and how we rig it. First off, rod and reel and line. I really like this 7.3 heavy action rod. That's my go-to for flipping a tube. This is a Fitzgerald Versa series rod. It is a 7.3. It does have a little bit of flex. Very fast tip. I can put that tube in really tight spaces. I can put it quietly in places, and with the 7.3 I can still get some distance for a fairly long flip in clear water. Almost always 17 or 20 pound line. I will say if I go to 15 pound fluorocarbon on a tube, occasionally I do that in super clear water. If you're at Beaver, Bull Shoals, sometimes at Table Rock, and you're not up the river, I'll go to that 7.3 medium heavy rod and in a Versa series and the 15 pound fluorocarbon. Always throwing a Lew's speed spool, high speed 7.5 to 1 gear ratio type reel. I work that tube with my rod, a lot of pitches, a lot of straight falls, shake the rod tip, bounce it, hop it, make the rod do the work. So the high speed reel gets the slack picked up, gets the loop tube in, lets me make more pitches in a day. The other thing, and I will say especially this time of year, and if you watch some of the live video footage, you'll see that a lot of fish hit that tube in the fall and in the late summer on the fall. And so you're feeding line out and you realize your line's just stopped, or you see it jump, and you've got to have that high-speed reel to take up that slack and penetrate that hook into the fish's jaw. So that's the rod and reel setups that I like. You cannot go wrong with that Fitzgerald Versa. You need to check them out at FitzgeraldFishing.com, I believe. Basics, sinkers. Right now, summertime, the other day, I was fishing a 3/8 with that tube, letting it fall fast. They seem to be reacting to it. So that is kind of the summertime, and even an early springtime if I'm in certain situations. 5/16 is probably my go-to in tungsten. That's probably the one I flipped the most. Truman, I've had success with it a lot around the stumps in that 2 to 7, 8, 10 foot range. That 5/16 is really good. It gets windier. I go to the 3/8. That's part of the reason we had the 3/8 on this last Saturday. Early spring, I've had success. I think I finished 4th in a Web Elites Outdoor Series tournament on Table Rock just 4 years ago. Fishing a 1/4 ounce sinker with a tube in dock stalls into February, just working it slow, clear out to 25 foot of water. Very, very patient with that one. But sometimes that tube can give me bites when the jig is not, or to be honest, sometimes you'll feel them thump a jig and they're just not eating it, and you're swinging and missing. I can pick up the tube and they eat it. So rigging, I do not peg, and I will explain why here in a minute, but I do not peg my sinker. When I hook, some of you will laugh, some of you will wonder. This is what I prefer. You may have a better hook that you have confidence in, but for tube fishing, the good old, and it's a cheaper hook, but this good old laser point Eagle Claw, Kale style hook, it is the absolute tube hook that I love. They used to be made with a spring, and sometimes that spring would rip more baits, but now they make it with a little keeper on it, and it's just got a needle point hook, needle point in, but that Kale style Eagle Claw is the best tube hook on the market. I like it better than the Trocar, my personal opinion. I like that needle point. So tying, basic Palomar knot for me. I don't do anything crazy or special. I do retie often, especially fishing docks on Table Rock or Lake of the Ozarks, fishing wood at Truman, or even in Mays Creek at Stockton or wherever, sometimes around the rocks in the wood. So wet that knot on the Palomar when you tie it. So basic setup right there for any tube I'm going to fish. Just as basic as you can get. Eagle Claw hook, sinker. It's loose. I mentioned that I don't peg, and here's why. There are times where you can pop that rod tip. You're fishing that tube, you pitch it in a dock stall, you pitch it next to a tree stump, you get that straight fall on a slack line, you lift up that slack, and you pop that rod, and when you pop that rod, it causes that tube to pop, and that tube separates from the sinker, and then it's a very erratic, slow fall back down for the tube to find the sinker. And that separation and that change in fall, do it in some shallow, clear water, do it in your bathtub, do it in the pool. Watch the uniqueness of the tube fall when it separates from that sinker from you snapping the rod just a little bit. Doesn't have to be a big snap. I'm just talking pop that slack line or pop that rod tip and just make that sinker separate and watch that tube do that fall. The next thing I will tell you, I put a tube rattle in my tubes. For most of my tubes, whether it's a Strike King tube or this little no-name one right here, I just use these plastic little rattles from Bass Pro, and you just shove them up in the end of the tube. We do also fish a little bit of this one, and I'll give you the names of them. My oldest, Dominic, fishes this one more than I do, but there are times where, for some reason, this tube, it's called a Tube X. It's only got 4 bigger appendages. The rattle in it, we use these glass rattles from Bass Pro. They've got a single ball in them, but they fit the tube better. The ball rattle, the little plastic balls don't fit these tubes near as well, but this little single glass rattle fits up in there very nicely. This is a great tube if you've got kids, especially, and that's where I got started on this one, was Dominic. They're thinner profile, they're very soft, and it was allowed for my boys to get a better hook set while fishing a tube. Fishing this bulkier tube, fishing that Strike King tube, you've got to lay the wood to them sometimes to get that hook to penetrate the fish's mouth. So let's talk about rigging. We talked about the sinker. Here's the key I learned from a gentleman in Texas. Take your scissors when you have your tube and just slide your scissors up there and just cut the bottom of your tube. I'm hoping I'm doing that where you can see it, so that when you rig it, you want to go point down into the head of the tube, come out for that Texas rigging. I wet this, slide that tube all the way on there, and then turn it around. And when you turn it around, we want the hook to lay in the slit that you cut, so that when I Texas rig it and I go through and I lay that hook back and skin hook it in, I am literally only going through one layer of plastic. So I cut that slit right there, slid the hook point past it, and then did a traditional skin hook Texas rig on the back piece of plastic. The only other real secret I'll tell you, take your pliers on any of these hooks, whether you're using a wide gap or whether you use this Eagle Claw. When you first get them out of the package, the point of that hook is going to actually point backwards into the tube. And what happens is, when you do that and that fish bites it, that tube, rather than popping out like this and catching the fish's jaw, what happens is that hook point's bent back in sharper, and you end up with a ball of tube with the hook in it. And so eventually that fish just lets go, and there's no hook point out because the point's pointed too sharply in. So what you do to remedy that, wide gap or this hook too, you just simply take your pliers and you grab a hold of that tube and you just flex it out. And you flex it out until when you rig it, it lays flat with your tube. When it's flat with your tube, then it's past this eye. And you can see how it's just laying flat right there. And so then you just skin hook it. Now when it goes through cover, it's weedless as can be. But when a fish bites down, the hook point's right there. The other thing I like about this, with this keeper, that tube, when the fish bites and tries to shake it, sometimes it'll go up the line. And so now there's no weight on that hook, the less leverage for the fish to throw it. The big deal is when a fish bites it and you go to set the hook on a traditional hook, a wide gap or a Z-bend or an L-bend hook, this tube had a tendency to push clear down. I can't even make it do it because of this. And you end up with this ball, something that looks like this. And again, that hook point never penetrated the fish's mouth. With this keeper, once that hook penetrates, it stays there. It either goes up the line or it stays right there on that, and you clear it, and there's no balling up of the tube. So that's why I choose this Eagle Claw hook. I'm not sponsored by Eagle Claw. Eagle Claw, call me. But it's just got the right components. It's got the right bend. You straighten that hook a little bit so it hooks better, and it's got the keeper. It doesn't let that tube ball down. So that's the basic setup right there, guys. That's 90% of the time, 95% of the time, I throw some form of green or green pumpkin, whether it's a kind of a watermelon or green pumpkin red, plain green pumpkin. I do keep the black and red handy in both, including the Tubex, Muddy Water, Early Spring, Grand Lake Special, black and red, that sort of thing. But that's how we rig a tube. There's a couple of secrets for you there. Give it a shot, and let me know what you think. Happy to know that maybe we helped you with a little success. Good luck and good fishing.